In the winter of 1887, 28-year-old Clara Bennett woke to find 17 horses standing outside her Wyoming ranch in the middle of a blizzard. 16 carried the brand of the richest rancher in the county, but the old horse leading them wore something Clara recognized instantly: her dead father's bell. The next morning, the wealthy rancher offered to erase Clara's entire debt if she returned that one old horse. She almost agreed. Then the horse escaped its stall and led her to a stone barn her father had kept locked for nearly 20 years. What Clara found inside revealed why those 17 horses had come to her ranch, and why someone desperately wanted them back. Wyoming, December 1887. Snow swept across the open basin beneath a moonless sky, swallowing fences, wagon tracks, and distant hills. By nightfall, the wind had turned the Bennett Ranch into a lonely island surrounded by white. Clara Bennett had learned during the previous 4 months that grief rarely arrived when a person had time for it. At 28, she was tall and lean from years of ranch work. With long chestnut brown hair, she usually twisted into a practical braid, pale skin weathered lightly across the cheeks, and gray-green eyes that had inherited more stubbornness than softness from her father. She was not naturally fearless. She had simply discovered that cattle still needed feeding when someone was afraid, bills still arrived when someone was grieving, and winter showed little sympathy for either. Her father, Samuel Bennett, had died suddenly in August after being thrown from a frightened horse. He had been 61, broad-shouldered even in old age, with iron-gray hair, a square beard, and the quiet temperament of a man who trusted animals more readily than strangers. Samuel had raised Clara alone after her mother died when Clara was 9. His death left her with 160 acres, 23 cattle, an aging barn, almost no savings, and a bank note due in spring. If Clara could not make the final payment, Bennett Ranch would belong to someone else before the first summer grass appeared. There was one other thing Samuel had left her, a sentence she had never understood. 3 days before he died, while repairing the north pasture fence, he had unexpectedly told her, "If the horses from the north ever come back, Clara, don't drive them away." She had laughed then and asked what horses he meant. Samuel had only stared toward the northern hills. "You'll know them if they come." For months later, Clara still occasionally heard those words while working alone. That night she was carrying another armful of firewood toward the cabin when something sounded beyond the wind. A horse whinnied. Clara stopped. The sound came again, low and strained, from somewhere near the front gate. She set down the wood, took the lantern from the porch, and walked toward the fence. Snow struck her face hard enough to make her turn sideways. At first she saw only darkness. Then the lantern revealed 2 eyes. Another pair appeared behind them. Then another. Clara raised the lantern higher. Her breath caught. Horses filled the road. She counted twice because the number seemed impossible. 17. They stood packed close together against the fence, their backs coated in snow, heads lowered against the wind. Several were painfully thin. One young chestnut trembled so violently its knees nearly touched. Broken lead ropes hung from 2 halters. No riders appeared behind them. Clara approached carefully. Easy. The nearest horses shifted but did not flee. Her lantern passed across a dark gelding's hindquarter, and Clara noticed a brand beneath the snow. Blackwood Ranch. Her stomach tightened. Blackwood was the largest horse and cattle operation for miles. Clara knew enough to understand that finding one Blackwood horse on her property could become an uncomfortable conversation. Finding several in the middle of the night was something else entirely. Then the herd separated. An old bay horse stepped forward. He was perhaps 23 or 24, with a graying muzzle, a deep chest gone slightly narrow with age, and an old white scar running down his right shoulder. Unlike the frightened younger animals, he watched Clara steadily. There was exhaustion in him, but little panic. Something hung beneath his throat. A small brass bell. Clara moved closer. The bell was dented along one side. A thin crack crossed its rim, and beneath years of tarnish remained 2 roughly scratched letters. S.B. Clara stopped breathing for a moment. She knew that bell. As a child, she had watched her father fasten it around the neck of a stubborn old milk cow so he could find her among the cottonwoods. Years later, Samuel had removed it and hung it above his workbench. Clara had not seen it since she was 16. Her hand rose toward the bell. "Where did you get this?" The old horse lowered his head. A dark shape lay in the snow behind him. Clara initially mistook it for a fallen blanket. Then she saw a boot. She rushed around the horse. A man lay face down between the animals, partially protected by their bodies. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet, with a lean, hard build beneath a worn shearling coat. Dark brown hair, streaked prematurely with gray near the temples, was frozen against his forehead. A short, rough beard covered a narrow jaw, and a healed cut crossed the bridge of his nose. His face had the weathered look of someone who had spent years sleeping beneath whatever roof the road provided. Blood darkened one trouser leg. Clara touched his neck. A pulse. Weak, but there. Getting him inside took nearly 20 minutes. Clara dragged him on a feed sack while the old bay followed almost to the porch. She cleaned the wound, wrapped it firmly, removed his frozen outer clothing, and warmed him gradually beside the stove. She found no identification, only a pocket knife, a few coins, and a leather horseman's glove worn nearly through at the fingers. Near dawn, the stranger moved. His eyes opened, dark hazel, alert almost immediately despite his exhaustion. Clara sat upright beside the stove. Don't try to stand. His gaze moved around the unfamiliar cabin before settling on her. Years of traveling alone had taught Thomas Reed, 36, to wake cautiously and trust slowly. He had worked as a horse handler, drover, an occasional breaker from Colorado to Montana, and a serious riding accident 7 years earlier had left him with the habit of judging danger before accepting kindness. "My name is Clara Bennett," she said. "You're at Bennett Ranch." His expression changed. "Not much, but enough." "Bennett?" "Yes." Thomas pushed himself onto one elbow despite the pain. Clara expected him to ask where he was hurt, how long he had been unconscious, or who had rescued him. Instead, he looked directly toward the window. "The horses?" Clara frowned. "What about them? Are they still here?" She glanced toward the barn. "All 17. Thomas closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, whatever relief had appeared was gone. "Then you've got trouble coming, Miss Bennett." Outside, somewhere beyond the cabin wall, the old bay's brass bell rang once in the wind. By mid-morning, the storm had weakened enough to reveal the road again. Clara was carrying hay toward the barn when 3 riders appeared through the thinning snow. The man in front rode a tall black gelding and wore a charcoal wool coat too finely cut for ordinary ranch work. Silas Whitmore, 57, was the owner of Blackwood Ranch and one of the wealthiest cattlemen in the county. He was tall but thickening around the waist, with silver-streaked black hair combed neatly behind his ears, a trimmed gray beard framing a broad jaw, and pale blue eyes that rarely revealed irritation before his voice did. 20 years of buying struggling ranches had given Silas a reputation for courtesy without generosity. He seldom threatened people. He preferred offering them choices when only one was affordable. Clara met him at the gate. Silas surveyed the horses in the corral. 16 belonged to Blackwood. Storm broke our north pasture fence. 16. His attention settled on the old bay standing apart from them. That one is Moses. Clara looked toward the brass bell beneath the horse's throat. Your horse. He was. Silas dismounted. When he approached Moses, something unexpected happened. The old horse backed away. Silas stopped immediately. Clara noticed a faded brand beneath Moses's winter coat. Unlike the clear Blackwood marks on several younger horses, this one was distorted, as though another mark had once occupied the same patch of hide. I want proof before anyone takes him. Silas's expression barely changed. Your father knew that horse. That struck harder than Clara expected. Inside the cabin, Thomas could stand now, though his injured leg forced him to lean against the table. He listened while Silas explained that his men would return with ropes and take the horses before another storm arrived. Then Silas noticed the bank notice beside Clara's ledger. His eyes remained there only a second. How much do you owe? Clara stiffened. That isn't your concern. Maybe it can be. Silas put on his gloves. Give me all 17 horses without dispute. I'll purchase the Bennett note from the bank and consider it settled. Clara stared at him. The ranch represented everything she had left of her father. Silas was offering to save it for 17 animals that had simply appeared at her gate. Thomas spoke after Silas had gone outside. Don't. Clara turned sharply. You don't know what I owe. No, but I know horses. He nodded toward the window. 16 might justify sending men through a storm. Moses doesn't. He's old, scarred, and well past his best working years. Clara understood immediately. Silas had not offered too little. He had offered far too much. That night, Clara woke to the sound of wood striking wood. Moses had forced open the corral latch. His tracks led north. Clara pulled on her coat and followed with a lantern. Thomas, unable to move quickly, remained behind. The tracks crossed the frozen pasture toward a section of the property Clara rarely visited. Then the lantern illuminated a low stone building. Her father's old north barn. Samuel had kept it locked for as long as Clara could remember. Moses stood directly before its door. "Why here?" Clara whispered. The horse touched his muzzle to the weathered boards. Clara returned to the cabin and opened Samuel's small wooden tool chest. Beneath a folded harness cloth, she found a long iron key she had seen many times without knowing what it opened. Minutes later, the old lock resisted twice before turning. The door groaned inward. Clara raised the lantern. No treasure waited inside. There were 6 decaying stalls, rusted horseshoes, leather straps hardened with age, and strange livestock brands burned into sections of the interior wall. Some resembled marks Clara knew from neighboring ranches. Others meant nothing to her. On a shelf beneath an overturned feed box lay a leather-bound ledger covered in dust. Clara opened it. The handwriting belonged to Samuel. Dates, horse colors, ages, scars, brands, names. Records stretched back almost 2 decades. Clara turned pages faster until a familiar name stopped her. Moses. Bay colt. White scar forming at right shoulder. Asterisk asterisk. Her eyes moved to the date. 1869. Below it, Samuel had written several entries Clara did not understand. She turned to the final page containing Moses's name. Only 4 words appeared there. Moses came home again. Clara brought the lantern closer. The entry was dated 18 years earlier. Behind her, the old horse stepped across the threshold without hesitation and walked toward the 3rd stall on the left. He stopped inside it. Clara stared at him, then at the ledger. Whatever had happened in this forgotten barn had happened long before she was old enough to remember it. And somehow, after 18 years, Moses remembered exactly where to return. Clara carried Samuel's ledger back to the cabin before sunrise. Thomas was awake when she entered, his injured legs stretched beside the stove. She placed the book on the table without explaining where she had found it. By daylight, they were reading entries neither of them could dismiss as ordinary ranch records. Samuel had worked as a stable hand at Blackwood Ranch in 1869, years before Clara was born. His notes described a December storm that scattered 23 breeding horses from Blackwood's northern range. Search parties abandoned the effort after 2 days, believing the animals had frozen in the foothills. Samuel had continued alone. He found the herd trapped behind a snow-filled ravine and brought them, several at a time, to the stone barn on what later became Bennett Ranch. Moses was among them, a young bay colt then, injured across the right shoulder by broken wire. Samuel had sketched the shape of the wound. Clara compared it with the white scar she had seen on Moses. It matched. For nearly 11 weeks, Samuel fed the 23 horses from his own hay. When spring opened the roads, Blackwood reclaimed them. That should have ended the story. It did not. The later pages changed from feeding records into something far more careful. Samuel had drawn livestock brands, noting scars, coat markings, white socks, damaged ears, and ownership claims from neighboring ranches. Besides several horses, he recorded 2 brands, an older mark and a newer Blackwood mark. Clara ran her finger beneath one sentence. New iron over old. Owner owed money. Horse claimed in settlement. No bill of sale shown to me. Asterisk asterisk. Her stomach tightened. So he thought Blackwood was taking horses. Thomas shook his head. He suspected it. That's different. Clara looked at him. Thomas tapped the ledger. Your father was careful. He wrote what he saw, not what he could prove. That distinction mattered. A dead man's private notebook might raise questions, but it could not establish who legally owned a horse 18 years later. Then Thomas stopped turning pages. Near the bottom of an entry Samuel had written, if ownership is disputed, examine beneath the new iron. Hair changes. Scar tissue remembers even when men do not. Asterisk asterisk. Thomas stared toward the barn. Clara understood. Moses. The following morning, she examined the old bay more carefully. The distorted mark on his flank contained irregular lines beneath the Blackwood brand. Clara could not tell what the older pattern had been, and she refused to injure the horse trying to expose it. Still, one question became impossible to ignore. Why would Silas Whitmore offer enough money to save Bennett Ranch for an elderly horse and 16 others he already claimed were his? Clara turned toward Thomas. He was no longer looking at Moses. He was looking at the floor. What aren't you telling me? Thomas remained silent. Thomas. His jaw tightened. I worked for Blackwood. Clara felt something inside her go cold. For how long? 14 months. He explained that Silas had hired him to handle difficult horses and move stock between distant pastures. Thomas had begun noticing animals arriving without clear purchase records. Some had altered brands. When he questioned the foreman, he was told to mind the horses and leave paperwork to men who understood business. Then, 3 nights before the blizzard, Thomas overheard 2 Blackwood hands discussing Moses. The old horse was to be moved south before anyone from the neighboring ranches saw him. Thomas decided to take Moses out. Clara stepped away from him. You stole him. I opened the north gate. And 16 horses happened to follow. I expected Moses to come through. The others pushed after him. Thomas had tried to turn them back, but the herd panicked when the storm arrived. He stayed with them because abandoning 17 horses in worsening weather would have killed some of them. You let me believe you were caught in this by accident. Yes. The answer came without excuse. Clara's anger rose precisely because he did not defend himself. She had carried him through snow, fed him, trusted him beneath her father's roof. Get your things. Thomas looked at her. Clara. Now. He could ride again, though not comfortably. Thomas packed slowly, saddled a borrowed ranch horse, and stopped at the gate. Moses stood on the other side. Thomas looked at the old bay for several seconds. I need you to understand one thing. Clara said nothing. I opened Blackwood's gate. His eyes shifted to Moses. But I didn't bring those horses to Bennett Ranch. Clara frowned. Thomas rested one hand on the saddle horn. When the storm blinded me, I lost the trail. I couldn't even tell north from south. He nodded toward Moses. That old horse took the front. Clara looked at the brass bell hanging beneath Moses's throat. Thomas turned his horse toward the road. He brought us here. Then he rode away, leaving Clara alone with 17 horses, her father's ledger, and the terrible possibility that Moses had remembered the road home for 18 years. 3 days after Thomas rode away, the story reached town before Clara did. By the time she entered the general store for flour and lamp oil, people were already calling the 17 animals Whitmore's stolen horses. Clara bought what she needed and returned home without defending herself. Arguing with gossip would not establish ownership. The real confrontation came the following morning. Silas Whitmore arrived with 6 riders and Deputy Marshal Henry Cole, a 49-year-old former cavalry sergeant with a heavy brown mustache, weathered face, and slight limp from an old leg wound. Cole was broad through the shoulders and slow in both movement and judgment. Years of settling livestock disputes had taught him that the loudest man was rarely the most reliable one. I have a claim from Blackwood, Cole told Clara. That doesn't mean I've decided whose horses they are. Clara surprised everyone. She opened the gate. If Silas says they're his, let people look at them. By noon, wagons and riders were gathering along Bennett Ranch. Curiosity had brought some. Old losses had brought others. Among them was Jacob Mercer, 63, a narrow, sun-darkened rancher with a white beard and 2 missing fingers from a hay-cutting accident. He had spent 40 years raising horses and remembered individual animals with almost irritating precision. Jacob walked slowly along the herd before stopping beside a sorrel mare. His face changed. My father bred a mare with that marking. Silas folded his arms. A white stocking isn't ownership. No, Jacob agreed. He lifted the mare's mane. But this might be. Behind her left ear was a crescent-shaped scar. Jacob explained that the mare's dam had received the same injury as a yearling, and the family line had been known for producing the same unusual white facial marking. It proved nothing by itself, but another rancher soon recognized an old rope scar on a gelding he believed had disappeared during a debt settlement years earlier. Then Jacob examined one Blackwood brand. He wet the hair and separated it carefully with his fingers. Beneath the newer scar tissue, part of another pattern remained visible. People stopped talking. Clara brought Samuel's ledger outside. Names were compared. Markings were checked. Some matched. Others did not. For the first time, the question was larger than 17 horses. Several families began asking what had happened to animals surrendered, sold, or simply lost during difficult years. Silas remained remarkably calm. Then he produced his own records: bills of sale, debt settlements, signed transfers. Cole examined them at Clara's kitchen table. Several appeared completely legitimate. Others were old enough that witnesses had died or moved away, but nothing on the page immediately proved fraud. Clara felt hope slipping away. Samuel had recorded suspicions. Silas had documents. In a dispute over property, that difference could decide everything. By dusk, Cole ordered that the horses remain at Bennett Ranch temporarily while the claims were reviewed. Nobody had won. That night, Clara went to check the corral. Moses was gone. A section of rail had fallen near the north pasture. His tracks continued beyond it. Clara followed with her lantern. Moses crossed the snow toward an old cottonwood standing beside a fence line Samuel had abandoned years earlier. The tree was dead, split by lightning near the crown. Moses stopped beneath it. Clara noticed 3 cuts in the bark, a triangle crossed by a short line. Samuel's mark. She had seen him carve it on tool handles when she was a child. Hoofbeats approached behind her. Clara turned sharply. Thomas emerged from the darkness beside Jacob Mercer. "I asked him to bring me," Thomas said before Clara could order him away. "He told me what happened today." Moses pawed once at the frozen ground beside the tree. Jacob raised his eyebrows. "Either that horse knows something, or he's developed an expensive interest in frozen dirt." Despite herself, Clara almost smiled. They dug. Nearly 2 feet down, Thomas's shovel struck metal. The 3 of them uncovered a rusted tin box wrapped in rotting oilcloth. Inside were no coins. There were receipts, original livestock transfers, letters, several handwritten payment acknowledgments. Clara carried everything back to the cabin and spread the papers beside Silas's copied claims. Then she saw it. One Blackwood document claimed 3 horses had been transferred in February 1874. Samuel possessed a receipt showing the same owner had paid that debt in full the previous December. Another Blackwood record listed 6 horses purchased together. An older letter described only 2 being voluntarily sold. The documents did not prove every accusation, but they proved something was wrong. Deputy Cole sent for Silas before morning. When Silas entered the cabin, Clara placed the conflicting papers side by side. For the first time since Clara had met him, Silas Whitmore did not offer a polite smile. He simply stared at Samuel Bennett's handwriting. The investigation lasted 7 weeks. There was no dramatic arrest at Bennett Ranch, no confession from Silas Whitmore, and no single document that settled 18 years of disputed ownership. Deputy Cole carried Samuel's records and the papers from the tin box to county authorities, where lawyers compared signatures, dates, debt settlements, and livestock descriptions against Blackwood's books. The truth that emerged was less simple than the rumors. Several of the 17 horses legally belonged to Blackwood. Some had been purchased properly from ranchers who needed money, but others carried markings that matched older records, and surviving receipts showed that at least 3 families had stronger claims than Silas had admitted. Those animals were eventually returned. Silas kept much of his ranch and wealth, but disputed claims connected to Bennett property were suspended while additional records were examined. For Clara, that delay mattered more than revenge. The bank could no longer treat the spring foreclosure as a simple, uncontested seizure. She had been given something money had nearly taken from her: time. The community changed more slowly. Jacob Mercer bought 2 Bennett calves at a fair price. Another family paid Clara to winter 4 horses in the old stone barn. Others followed. By autumn, boarding horses and selling cattle had given Bennett Ranch enough income to survive another season. Clara did not become rich. She still patched her gloves and calculated hay carefully. But for the first time since Samuel died, every number in her ledger did not feel like a countdown. Thomas returned in October. He arrived leading 3 young horses he had purchased with wages earned breaking stock farther south. His leg had healed, though cold mornings still left him slightly stiff. He stopped outside the gate instead of assuming he was welcome. "I need winter pasture," he said. Clara studied the horses. "And I pay the same rate as everyone else. No favors. None." She opened the gate. That was how trust returned. Not through an apology repeated until it became meaningless, but through ordinary days in which Thomas did what he said he would do. Before winter, Jacob and several ranchers helped rebuild the north fence and strengthen the stone barn. Men who had once ridden out merely to stare at Clara's supposedly stolen horses now hauled timber, repaired stalls, and stacked hay beneath the roof. Nobody called it charity. Clara provided meals, they provided labor. In ranch country, pride sometimes survived kindness better when kindness wore work clothes. Moses spent that winter in the third stall. Age was catching him. His back had hollowed. His bay coat had become heavily flecked with gray, and chewing coarse hay took longer. Yet every morning he still walked into the yard and lifted his head toward the northern hills. Spring arrived quietly. One April morning, Clara opened the pasture gate, and Moses walked out alone. He climbed the northern rise slowly. Thomas joined Clara beside the fence. "Want me to bring him back?" Clara watched the old horse reach the crest. For several minutes Moses stood there, the Wyoming wind moving through his thinning mane. Below him lay the stone barn, the cabin, the repaired fences, and the land Samuel Bennett had fought to keep. "No," Clara said softly. "He knows the way home." At sunset, the brass bell sounded near the gate. Moses had returned. It was his last spring. He died peacefully months later in the pasture near the stone barn, and Clara buried him on the northern rise. She removed the old brass bell and hung it above the barn door. Thomas proposed there the following autumn. He had apparently prepared several sentences. Clara allowed him to finish approximately half of them before saying yes. Years passed. Bennett Ranch never became the largest ranch in Wyoming. It became something Clara valued more, a place that endured. The stone barn remained a winter shelter, and younger ranchers sometimes noticed the battered bell above its doorway. When they asked about it, Clara told them about Moses, about the 23 horses Samuel saved 18 years before that terrible winter, about an old horse who remembered the road back, and about 17 frightened animals that followed him through a blizzard to the one place he had once been safe. The first time Moses came to Bennett Ranch, Samuel Bennett saved him. 18 years later, Moses came home again, and this time, he helped save Samuel's daughter. Maybe the greatest miracle in Clara Bennett's story was never that an old horse remembered the road home after 18 years. Maybe the miracle began much earlier, when Samuel Bennett chose to save 23 frightened horses during a winter when no one would have blamed him for turning away. Samuel never lived long enough to know what that kindness would become. He could not have known that one day his daughter would stand on the edge of losing everything he had left her. He could not have known that Moses would grow old, cross those hills again, and somehow find his way back to the very place where he had once been given shelter. But perhaps God sees the road long before we do. Sometimes his miracles do not arrive with thunder from heaven. Sometimes they come quietly, through an old horse wearing a battered brass bell, through a stranger who returns after making mistakes, or through neighbors who finally choose to stand beside someone they once doubted. And perhaps that is worth remembering in our own lives. The kindness you give today may seem small. The person you forgive may never repay you. The animal you help may never understand your name. And the good you do when nobody is watching may appear to disappear completely. But love has a strange way of leaving tracks. Sometimes those tracks remain hidden for years. And sometimes, when we are lost in our own winter, God allows something we once gave away freely to find its way home. If Clara and Moses touched your heart, share this story with someone who may need a little hope today. And tell us in the comments, have you ever experienced a kindness or a blessing that returned to you when you needed it most? If you enjoy stories about faith, second chances, and the extraordinary bond between people and animals, please subscribe and join us for the next story. May God bless you and your family. Protect the animals who share this world with us. Bring comfort to anyone carrying a quiet burden tonight, and guide every heart that feels lost toward the road that leads home. God bless you, wherever you are.